All right. So, welcome everybody. Hello. And so glad you're here today, joining our Community College STEM Network webinar. My name is Michelle Vanoy, and I'm Director of the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers and PI of the CCSN, the Community College STEM Network. And I'm really excited about the work that we're doing on the CCSN. We're a group of researchers and practitioners who are working together to generate and share research on community college student STEM pathways. And we have an ongoing webinar series that you're part of today, as well as research projects and partnerships that are focused on understanding how low-income academically talented students navigate STEM pathways. So just so everyone knows, we're recording this webinar. It'll be shared with everyone to watch later. We'll also ask that you keep your cameras off for the duration of the webinar, but we encourage everyone to ask any questions or add in comments in the chat throughout, and we'll be happy to answer questions throughout, as well as have some discussion at the end. So without much further ado, I want to take a moment to introduce our presenters. We have researchers, Dr. Sam Scoville and Eliza Peterson, both researchers at the Rutgers ERC, and they will be sharing some really interesting findings from some research that we just completed at our center at Rutgers on student decision-making in IT programs. So I'm going to hand it over to our esteemed presenters to share some findings and engage in discussion with everybody. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Scoville, and I'm going to be starting us off here today with factors impacting community college student decision-making and information technology at Ivy Tech Community College. So it's really of the main study goals were to understand student decision-making relative to community college IT programs and careers. It's a National Science Foundation Advanced Technical Education Targeted Applied Research Grant. And it's an outgrowth of an evaluation partnership for a TACT Round 4 grant. And we're currently wrapping up and finalizing and disseminating our publications, which at the end I'll have a slide that has a QR code where you can open up all of the reports that and issue briefs we've put out on the project so far. So the importance of decision-making. Informed decisions about technical programs and careers can really help boost completion and employment. Knowing requirements and getting students on track early, especially in specialized programs like IT, where students have very particular requirements that they might need to go through to finish their certificate program or their associate's degree. It also helps with motivation to a goal. However, there isn't very much known about how community college students make these types of decisions, especially for technical programs like IT. But IT is very attractive to many students because of the job prospects that they have when they finish their programs. But there are many subfields of IT and graduation requirements, short-term credential options to think about, and different academic pathways that students can take. So while there are many options and many opportunities, that leaves space for potential confusion. So it's important for us to think about and understand the different ways that students might come to make decisions around these types of programs. So the goal overall, right, was to understand student decision-making about IT programs and careers. Our research focused on two overarching research questions. How do community college students make the decision to enter technician programs, and how do students learn about programs and careers to decide to enter a program? And then what experiences and information influence student decision-making about programs and careers in IT? And how do college information tools and advising resources influence these decisions, particularly early in student enrollment? So in this presentation, we're focusing on the major findings from two of our reports. The first is a longitudinal study of IT student decision-making, where we followed technician students over time. And the other looks at how two groups of students, program completers and program beginners, use sources of information in their decision-making process. So a little bit about methods, a little bit of background on Ivy Tech first is Ivy Tech Community College is Indiana's public community college system with campuses and sites across the state. The School of Information Technology offers degree and certificate programs in a number of different fields. At the time of our data collection, they offered computer science, cloud technologies, cybersecurity and information assurance, data analytics, informatics, IT support, network infrastructure, and software development. We conducted student surveys as a way to gather interview participants for the longitudinal study, as well as the pandemic subset or program beginners. So these surveys were distributed to students and Ivy Tech students enrolled in key IT courses. And during the survey, we asked if students would be interested in participating, in an interview. And those who were interested, we followed up and they participated in an interview with us. The program completers were found in a different way. Since they had finished their program, they weren't in key IT courses any longer. They were identified using Ivy Tech institutional data, originally selected so that they would be representative of the larger IT student population's demographics. As we were going through that, we noticed that the students skewed very much towards white males, which is representative of the overall population, but we did some more purposive sampling of more underrepresented groups in this particular sample to get a little bit more of a broad picture of how different types of students could complete programs. So I'll hand things over to Eliza, who's going to talk a bit about the longitudinal study of community college IT students.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sam. So as Sam touched on, part of this study involved a longitudinal sample of students, which we followed over the course of 3 years. And we interviewed them throughout these 3 years, 2019, 2020, 2021. So we explore the decision-making of 26 students. These were students who participated in at least 2 rounds of our interviews that were enrolled in an Ivy Tech IT certificate or degree program at the time of the first of the survey that we did before the interviews. We transcribed these interviews and then they were coded in vivo, and we analyzed them in various ways, including templates that we developed based on literature and also responding to themes that we noticed among the interviews. Next slide, please. So one of the themes that we noticed, there were a couple of determinants of student choice sets. One of those was we noticed this theme of a factory culture sort of running through a lot of the interviewees. A lot of them expressed that they felt like going into a factory and performing that type of manual labor was one of the biggest options available to them. And many students sort of responded saying, I saw a lot of family members do that, but I realized, that wasn't for me. And that's one thing that inspired them to pursue a path in IT. There was this dichotomy sort of students expressing there's a difference between jobs where you work with your hands and jobs where you work with your brain. And they were leaning more towards the latter. Another determinant of student choice set among our longitudinal sample, was the role, unsurprisingly, of family and social circles. These could be supporting or constraining factors. A lot of people mentioned, family members helping them make decisions, saying, oh, like you're so good with computers, that type of thing. Whereas other people, they felt limited by their network. And some also expressed that they struggled with the expectations of their family or their social circle. Another major determinant among our sample that we noticed was financial status and access to scholarships or grants. Some students were pretty influenced by access to, for example, the Indiana Next Level Jobs Workforce Ready Grant, which supports students pursuing short-term training in certain high-demand fields such as IT. So this sort of guided them as they were making decisions about what programs to pursue. And it also posed a burden for students at times who didn't have access to scholarships, made it more difficult to, or had not enough in scholarship money, made it difficult to complete their education. Next slide, please. One of our students in the sample provided a great example of that factory culture. They said, so I thought I'd rather just work in an office. I'd rather work with computers. I'd rather use my brain because I'm not the type of person who can stand at a job and do the same thing for 10 hours. I want to do something that is going to challenge me and be interesting. This student had been working as a temp at an auto factory, and they really struggled in that environment. And that's one of the things that inspired them to choose IT. Next slide, please. Another major theme that we noticed, apart from those determinants of the choice set, was early interest and a hobby to career reckoning. A lot of students in the sample displayed these tendencies. We noticed that it seemed like students with an early interest in IT and an IT-related hobby, they might be a stronger candidate in terms of success in the program and success after completion of the program. A lot of the most popular hobbies that we noticed among the sample were video gaming, coding, server management, and things like that, things that are related to IT and that students can use to informally boost their skills. And this serves them in the classroom and beyond, we noticed. We also noticed that a lot of hobbyists in the sample were encouraged to pursue a career in IT by friends and family. For example, one student mentioned that they were always the go-to person in their family when anyone's VCR was broken, their computer was having problems, stuff like that. And that guided them towards a career in IT, and their family sort of encouraged them, saying, you know, you're my own personal IT support guy. And, you know, these hobbies helped these students seize IT-related opportunities. A high sense of self-efficacy developed through these hobbies may help with persistence because a lot of students struggle in early IT classes. So students already coming in with certain skills might fare better. And this also plays into the role of interest and enjoyment in career decisions. If you're already interested in IT through your hobbies or through really formative experiences that happen in your childhood, a lot of people actually mentioned sharing this with their parents. You know, their parents would play video games with them as a kid, or their parents would, I remember one student mentioned their parents would always let them take apart the computer and put it back together when they were really little. And that was a really formative memory that helped guide them as they made decisions about what to pursue in community college. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry, I think these are a little bit out of order. So this is an example of a student who had an early interest in IT and the pathway that they took throughout. You know, it starts playing video games with their mom and it ends up them enrolling in an IT program at Ivy Tech. They had some trouble along the way, but by the end of the time that we interviewed them, they were still planning to pursue an IT or database management career in the future. This is just one example. A lot of students followed kind of a similar path in that the interest was formed very early and that guided them towards IT. Could you go back a slide, Sam? So the next major theme that we noticed amongst our sample was the relationship between age and engagement. And this quote will sort of set us up for as we look at this a little bit more deeply. If I go way back, one of the things I really regret was not taking the SAT in high school. That would have opened up my education opportunities a lot earlier in life. And I had to overcome so many hurdles because of that. I could have already been done today. This student, their relationship to making decisions about their career just muted myself. Clearly, I am not an IT professional. A lot of students seem to mature, and as they matured, that influenced their decision making. Could you go to 2 slides, Sam? Thank you. One of the trends that we noticed was confidence and decision style. They had some sort of relationship. A lot of students in the sample that were younger, even over the course of the 3 years of the study, they gained decision-making confidence over time. And they moved from being a bit more idiosyncratic to systematic in their decision-making over time. They started out being very influenced by chance, and they ended up being more proactive, seeking out information, comparing all their options by the end. We noticed that idiosyncratic decision-making was more common amongst the younger traditional age students. Another trend that we noticed that prior quote sort of expressed was reflecting on the past. Some people expressed they wish that they were more engaged in their past decision-making. They had regrets about their high school performance, stopping out of college at an earlier time, stuff like that. And then for information sourcing, I sort of touched on this a little bit. We noticed that over time, students moved from relying on happenstance to actively seeking out information from various sources, be it your family, the internet, advisors, college faculty members, and taking all this information and being more organized about the way that they would deal with it and process it and turn it into decision-making fodder. Next slide, please. And I think here's another quote expressing more specifically that relationship between age and information seeking and decision making. A lot of times, if I see a problem present itself, I go and try to collect as much information that I can and then go ahead on it. But before, when they were younger, if there was a problem, well, I'm going to go ask someone else to fix the problem straight out without doing anything to fix it myself. So this student was a great example of someone who was really influenced by chance at the beginning of their journey, and by the end of the time that we were speaking to them, they were more proactive and taking a more active role in their decision-making process, which was pretty common amongst our sample. And that is a great segue to Sam to tell us more about the information sources paper.
Thanks, Eliza. So yeah, we, in the process of sort of exploring these different kinds of decision-making factors that we were looking at among students, one thing that I noticed both in the literature and then in our data was how students actually seek out information. So I was looking at interviews with program beginners, students who had begun their education in an IT program in March 2020, as well as interviews with program completers, students who had recently completed a program in IT. They had started in the program prior to the pandemic, but they were engaged in the job search primarily during the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. So there's a number of different information sources that we look at in the paper. And we developed these categories in conversation with the literature. So a lot of the literature didn't look directly at information sources, but would talk about information sources in the process of discussing how students make decisions. And so from that, we developed 3 categories: personal social networks, online resources, and then the institutional network. So personal social network folks included people's family members, their friends, their roommates, their employers, and their coworkers, as well as anyone else who sort of came in from their personal life prior to them being at Ivy Tech. Their online resources we considered were the Ivy Tech website, job search websites such as Indeed or Monster, online forums, news websites, and then social media. And then institutional network was comprised of advisors, professors and instructors, people from the College Career Center, and then any professional contacts met through Ivy Tech connections. So there was some examples of students who would get connected by their faculty to someone who they knew working in the field. And so we considered that part of the institutional network, because if they weren't part of Ivy Tech, they most likely would never have met that professional. So personal networks were really important, especially in the program decision phase. So one program completer mentioned that he consulted most of his friends about his college decisions, specifically mentioning that he ultimately decided to attend Ivy Tech because one of his friends suggested that they go to school together. And this particular friend not only influenced his student's school choice, but also his program choice. So he had been talking to his friend about programs to take, and his friend had said something about IT, and so they ended up going to Ivy Tech and studying similar things. So personal social networks, a few students used personal contacts who were not employed in their target field as information sources for academic and career decisions. These friends and family members knew the participant well and were able to make suggestions based on that knowledge. So one completer said she runs decisions by her friends and family, and she likes to get advice from her adult children. So she was an older student, and she said, they know me. My kids are 32 and 31. I can bounce stuff off my kids, and they will tell me, you will hate that, you know? So it's nice to have that. And another student said, I guess when I was younger, my cousin gave me the idea of doing something in informatics, like being an administrator, and I did research on it. And that's kind of how I got the idea, because I always liked IT. So that's pretty much it. And that's from there I kind of knew. Similar to some of the stuff that Eliza said, there was this connection in that last quote about always being interested in IT. So they had an early interest in IT, although we didn't look at that as systematically in this sample. You can see that there's some overlap between how students that Eliza was studying in the longitudinal paper have similar things going on to students in these completer and pandemic samples. So institutional networks, over half of our sample reported using some source of information provided by Ivy Tech as an information source. Students, once they were enrolled at Ivy Tech, developed their own institutional networks, made up generally of instructors, advisors, and other students. They especially relied on instructors and advisors for information. Instructors and advisors were the primary sources of information for students at Ivy Tech. They also sometimes would use Ivy Tech career centers or career development teams as sources of institutional information. So I'm here to highlight an example. A completer participant who received a cybersecurity certificate and works in cybersecurity and information assurance has plans to continue his education in the future to eventually obtain a master's degree. He routinely uses multiple sources of information when he's making decisions. He recounted when he first saw the advertisement for his current job. He reached out to one of his professors, a member of his institutional network, to ask for advice and insight relative to pursuing his career. He also consults his friends and family for their opinions, his advisor, and then relies heavily on his own interest in something. His major information source are his personal, social, and institutional networks. Instructors tended to be among the most helpful members of students' institutional networks. Faculty and instructors' information has a strong influence on student decisions because the information often comes with a recommendation. A program beginner was actually directly influenced to enter a selective continuing education program by one of their professors, stating that he was recommended by a professor for a training program through Salesforce, where upon completion of the program, he would be able to earn a certificate and receive assistance in finding jobs in the field. Some participants talked to more than one advisor about classes before making the decision to enroll, and students tended to rely heavily on advisors rather than faculty members when making decisions about courses and programs. At least one participant considered their IT-specific advisor to be the most important information source that they used, noting that they used at least one other information source as well. And that was quite common. Students often used more than one information source and had targeted reasons to use particular types of information. And then there was another student who was choosing between business and IT as a program choice, spoke with an IT-specific advisor who then influenced her to think more seriously about pursuing a career in IT. One of the major, very popular sources of information, which is rather unsurprising, is the internet. Students use the internet as a major information source when looking for information about programs and jobs. Students distinctly used the Ivy Tech website for programmatic information and other more general sites like Google or job boards for gathering their career information. So students tended to use job search websites and search engines to find out about careers. So they would search a job, read a job description, see what it said, and then like in the previous example, some students would actually bring that information to faculty to sort of vet it and get their opinion on it. They primarily use the Ivy Tech website for academic information about academic programs, and a total of 62% of participants reported using the internet as an information source. So another example of a student and their information sourcing, a recent enrollee, a beginner, became interested in IT because her brother-in-law is in IT and was able to pass along knowledge of the field. Gathering as much information as she could about IT careers was an important decision-making aspect to her. To do this, she spoke with an Ivy Tech advisor and then Googled, which was a common phrase that our students would use, IT careers, and then talked to a faculty advisor. Since all of this was happening during the pandemic, she took advantage of virtual advising. And in addition to using all these resources for information gathering, she also routinely goes to her husband for information and advice when she makes decisions. Another example of a student who would use multiple forms of information when making decisions. So another important source of information online was the Ivy Tech website, as I previously discussed. This example right here, this quote from a student, they said, really, once I found out about the program, I went to Ivy Tech's website and just kind of investigated exactly what enrollment in the program would entail. When I enrolled, it was actually really quick. I got an email about the opportunity and the actual program to take advantage of it. It started the next week, so I enrolled. I think it was a Friday and the program started the following Wednesday. And in this quote, I'm pretty sure if I'm remembering correctly, the student was also talking about the Next Level Jobs program that Eliza already previously discussed. So that program sent out, as part of their marketing, sent out emails to people that were collecting unemployment during the pandemic. And some of the IT programs were covered by this. So students were able to go into these certificate and other programs and get their education completely paid for. So that was a really important example of how information on the website really connected to the student understanding what programs are available and then getting enrolled and starting their program. So another student example, a completer participant used multiple information sources to make career and program decisions throughout her tenure at Ivy Tech. She used the internet to apply for jobs on online job boards and attended a few institutionally run conferences where she got the opportunity to meet with employers and practice presenting herself in a professional environment. She also had a professor who would stay behind after class to provide students with information about the cybersecurity program and about careers in the field. Perhaps most interestingly, she and some of her peers in the cybersecurity program set up an informal cohort on their own. She reported that the group would get together and run simulations of vulnerable machines, which they would work together to resecure. These friends were an important information source for her. So this was really one of the acute examples of students creating institutional networks with other students within the School of IT at Ivy Tech. So we have a few key takeaways from these two particular reports for the project. First, information plays a key role in student decision-making, but various information sources come into play during certain periods of time in the decision-making process. The ways students use information to make decisions about programs and careers changes over time, especially as they develop institutional relationships with faculty and advisors. Early and persistent STEM identity plays a key role in the motivations that our participants had to pursue a program and career in a technical field like IT, which may be enhanced by their participation in an IT-related hobby. And finally, personal backgrounds such as family, identity, and class can either constrain or expand student choice sets when making decisions about IT education and careers. So as I said previously, we have a number of different publications that are coming out of this project. This QR code here will bring you to our website where you can look up and check out all the different issue briefs and reports that we have coming out about this project. That's all we have for content for you all, but we also wanted to open it up for Q&A and discussion so that we can really talk about these findings and hear what you all have to say about your own institutions and how decision-making might work within other technician fields other than IT. So I'll leave that up so folks can navigate to the website and then open it up. If people have comments or questions, you can feel free to use the chat or unmute, raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable with.
So I'm curious, I know we have some folks from our partners at Ivy Tech on this this webinar today. I wonder if anyone has any other thoughts or reflections or to add to what we found in terms of how this resonates with what you do, or how you make sense of the findings here.
Well, Michelle, this is Sue Smith. I'm sorry. I don't teach these courses, but I do always think it's interesting to hear why students choose what they choose and what affects their choices. So I think for me, that is really the most fascinating thing is to, I ask my adult children, I, talk to my husband, how do they choose? So different from the way I chose my career and my, my choices.
It's true, and there's some interesting findings too about how that changes over the life course too, I think, from what we saw in the research here. So I wonder if that has implications for folks who work with students of different ages, different stages of life. Many factors to consider.
I think it does. I think it's good information for coaches and folks who are working with those administrators who are working with those students.
So I teach at Ivy Tech. I'm software dev faculty. This is probably not surprising, speaking anecdotally here, but I see a much higher dropout rate among students who are first generation college students. Specifically, my guess, I mean, I can't do exit interviews with the students who drop out of class, but they seem like the ones who don't have much support. They don't know where to turn for resources when they're struggling in class and that kind of thing. So I guess that's just kind of my 2 cents on it.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think that's like that's important to think about is like, right, our study, this, especially the information sources, was completers who obviously went through a program successfully, and then students who are at the beginning of their program. So we don't necessarily know how they fared, but I think for our study, it's important to think about, especially the completers, were people that were successfully seeking out information probably throughout their time at Ivy Tech. So it may be more difficult for others to gather that information. Oh, and I see a hand from Ryan.
Hello, Ryan Messinelli. I teach IT at Everett Community College up near Seattle area. And 2 things that were coming to my brain as I was listening to this conversation that I'm kind of curious if it's tracked or if it's something that's been thought about. One is the adult learner aspect, like how many adult learners are running through these programs and what is the like the completion rate or percentages that come out of that. And then the other one's a little bit of a flip of that conversation of something that I've been looking at here in Snohomish County is the K-12 component of having that conversation brought down lower and lower into these school districts. And I'm just kind of curious from your schools, are you looking at bringing down that college level professor conversation in some type of form to like sixth or seventh graders and start that, hey, here's IT in the world right now type of thing?
Something that came up during our research was regarding the K-12 point, was that a lot of students came in to Ivy Tech thinking, oh, I took a computer science class in high school. I'm going to pursue computer science in college, not realizing, the variety within IT, and thinking that computer science program was going to be just like their computer science class in high school. Because a lot of high schools in Indiana, their the class in high school was called computer science, even though it wasn't as similar to like what an actual computer science program would be like. So that is actually, I think Danette can probably speak to that. That's something that has changed since the study happened, but it was a problem and it influenced how students made decisions. So I think it's important to bring in, specific knowledge about IT earlier on in the pipeline. And I know that there's different efforts to do that. Sam, is there anything you want to add to that point?
No, you said exactly like pretty much what I was gonna say. I don't, in terms of adult students, yeah, I think we didn't have like enough in our sample to really, do like a paper, an issue brief, so focusing specifically on adult students, but I think it would be interesting to see like, we hadn't thought about really, I think, breaking our data down that way in particular to look at adult students versus adults, older students versus, like more traditional age, like 18 to 24-year-olds. But I think that's an important group to consider. It's important to consider age and how age would probably impact the information sources that people would go to, and then in that way also impact their persistence in a program or their decision to join a particular program if they can't get that information they need versus someone who might be have a lot of information.
Yeah, as Sam said, we didn't do too much specific analysis of that. But remembering, analyzing these interviews, I got the sense that a lot of adult students, while there are some barriers in their way, like a lot of them, had to take care of children, they had caretaking responsibilities, or, they have a full-time job. The faculty, because we didn't talk about this in the papers that we talked about today, but other papers that we wrote focus more on like the faculty perspective, and the faculty tended to say adult students, they're more likely to stick to it, whereas younger students are more likely to have trouble following through. Not every time, there's plenty of young students that are on the ball, but adult students, so I guess, were more business-like. They understood how important it was, whereas some of the younger students were less focused. And again, not always the case, but just general trends. It looks like we have some questions in the chat. Did you find that anything in particular influenced the decision to stay in a STEM field or stay in college? There's a lot of interest in sense of belonging, for example, right now. Did students talk about how fitting in might have influenced them? Sam, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then I can add.
Yeah, I don't really feel like it came up too much as I remember in the samples of the information sources paper, and that one. I don't, mostly probably because like, yeah, I'm trying to think if that really came up in any of the interviews that I was working closely with. I think one place where it came up that is interesting is from the faculty perspective. It actually came up in The paper we wrote, the report we wrote on experiences with the pandemic through teaching during the pandemic and then at virtual advising in the pandemic. Faculty thought that students were more isolated and had less of a sense of belonging because of online learning during the pandemic and after. But that was really a faculty perspective and not one that came up from the students as much. There was maybe one student I remember who talked about how at first it was isolating at home, but then it became more convenient because he was a father and could take care of his kids while taking classes, so it worked out well for him. But in terms of our sample, I don't remember much about sense of belonging. Did that come up in the longitudinal sample at all, Eliza?
There was a little bit about it. I think we had expected initially that there would be more. But that might be due in part to the nature of the sample, which was also in turn influenced by the makeup of the School of IT in general. I know that we kind of expected there to be some sort of like gendered aspects to a sense of belonging, or maybe some racial aspects to it, but that didn't really come across in most of our interviews. One of the most notable examples was one of the students we interviewed was Southeast Asian, and he expressed that he felt very comfortable in the field of IT because he felt like people of his race were very well represented in the field. And that was one of the more notable examples. There was also a couple of people who sort of felt like there weren't as many resources for them because of their race, but again, that wasn't super common in our sample. But our sample was also skewed, as Sam mentioned. I mean, it wasn't skewed, it was pretty similar to what the makeup of the School of IT is like. But a lot of our subjects were white males. And that tends to be who, you know, one of the more popular groups in IT, just in general. Sam, is there anything that you want to add to that, or?
No, I think I appreciate those examples. I think those are helpful.
Curious on one other thing with dealing with kind of the population. Um, how often was alumni coming back into the program to discuss things from that 1 year out or 2 year out, help make decision? And it's possible that my short-term memory might have just missed it, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about, that alumni question.
So like, how did the completer population that we talked to like think about their decisions? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, more like on your completed population coming back and helping the newer students who are coming through with their decision process. Because you have the
Okay.
instructor advisors, but then sometimes having that alumni is being able to come back in and talk about that bottom pathway. They made it through the whole thing. Here's my experience type of things. Did that have any impact? Or was that something that maybe wasn't actually thought about or discussed?
I don't think that ever came up in our data as something that anyone ever did or provided as an example, but we do have someone from Ivy Tech, Jeanette, is on the call, and I wonder if she's ever heard of students like events with alumni coming back and talking to students as an information source.
Sorry, Sam, I couldn't unmute myself. So,
Oh.
and I am an IT person, right? So, Eliza, you muted yourself and I couldn't unmute myself. I was about to type in the chat. So, thank you. I know anecdotally, you know, we at the campus level, we all have alumni that will come back and talk to students, or students that are about to graduate, talk to the beginning students. But in terms of this survey and the way that it was conducted, Ivy Tech is a very large institution with many, 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 many campuses. And so I would have found it interesting if any of them had said they went back to their campus to help. But I do know that that does make a difference, Ryan. That is very good point. And it's always helpful.
That's
Thanks,
also,
Jeanette.
I would just say it's also a general topic or issue that I've heard raised often within community college circles is something that has the potential to be done more. I think in general, community colleges don't reach out as much to alumni as you know, four-year institutions do. And so you know, it's likely that, you know, it's just not something in general that's done in the field, but it seems like an area that certainly could be ripe for further development.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And circling back to Elizabeth's questions from the chat, I wanted to bring something up that I forgot to mention that I think is interesting and might resonate with some of our faculty members on the call, is that math requirements played a pretty big role in student decision making. You know, in IT, there's a good amount of variety between different programs in terms of what sort of math you have to take. You know, the difference between being in an information technology program versus a computer science program. Some you have to take calculus for, others you only need quantitative reasoning. And students were influenced within IT to choose a different major because of the requirements of math. Some of them saw it as, you know, I have to get through this in order to do my career. I remember one really good quote a student said was, you know, I like everything about my career. It's just the math that I don't like. So it was sort of seen as, you know, a necessary evil to get through. Although other students who had high levels of self-efficacy in math, it didn't influence them as much because they were thinking, oh, you know, I'm good at math, so this won't be a problem for me.
Thanks for that, Eliza. Do we have any other questions or thoughts?
I'm curious for the researchers out there, anything here? I know there's several researchers, I think, in our group here. I don't know if anyone else has come across similar findings, different findings, or questions for further research that this might spark. Or maybe the same question for folks in the practitioner world as well. What other things would you like to know?
Well, you know, getting them in the door is one thing, but retaining students is always something else. And so that's what we're always trying to figure out, I think.
You know, I'm looking at the rates right now in Tableau, and yeah, it'd be nice if we could figure that out.
Yeah, more research that could follow students over time, I think, is really important. Like we got at that with the longitudinal sample that we have, but being able to do that on a larger scale to follow students over time to see sort of the barriers they might face over time, as well as things that might like push them to finish and motivate them, I think is important research that we could definitely contribute more to is yeah, how are students thinking about these things over time, and how do you make decisions in the face of a barrier that you might be facing, I think is really important, or a challenge that is potentially going to mean that you would drop out. I think there's some important research questions there.
Hi, this is Elizabeth. I'm at the University of Washington. I have a question for those of you in Indiana. I heard a rumor that there's a great new Tableau dashboard that you all are able to use to follow your students through basically from the start of their university career and maybe even into employment. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit how, as faculty members or in your role in Indiana, you are using that data, if you're using that data, if you have access to it, or if you even know what I'm talking about, because that's really the extent of the information that I have. So I'm just curious to learn more.
Well, Dr. Smith just mentioned she was in IV Analytics, and that's actually a Tableau implementation for Ivy Tech. And we have more data than we could ever imagine. So I think we're still all trying to figure out just what's there. We can follow our students. It all depends on how you define follow and that sort of thing. So in my own personal use of the data so far, it's just been aggregate data for my School of IT students on my campus. And Sue, I don't know if you or Andrew could address, or Michael even, any other way you use this data. Oh, Sue, you're muted.
Sorry. I use it, for a lot of things. I use it for grant reporting. It's very helpful in projecting, what's going to be happening. And, it's just, we just use it pretty routinely here for those kinds of things. Right now I'm looking for the dropout rate for the college, or dropout stopout rate for the college. Just to kind of see what that is overall. So yeah, and you can see that by program, you can see that by class as well. So it's really interesting.
One aspect that I'm working on a grant as well right now, that we're using the data within Tableau, that we have it tied to workforce jobs, specific SIP/SAP codes from the Department of Labor, that then tie to specific programs, so we can demonstrate to students there's different job opportunities and the growth of those by the time they would be getting their degrees when we're onboarding them. So that's one aspect. And then I'm looking at past data for specific completions of students and seeing the timelines for their completions, because it's two aspects of a grant project I'm looking at. So I'm heavily into that system as well, looking at all types of different data. As Danette referenced, there's more data than we know what to do with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this webinar. I think we're just about at the end of our time together, but I wanted to share more information if you enjoyed today's discussion. I hope you'll come back. We're doing webinars every other month on various topics related to community college STEM pathways. Also next month, we'll have a follow-up discussion from today's webinar. So if you want to dig into some of these questions more, or think about them further and come back and rejoin us again, we'll be having another conversation. David Brown, co-PI on the CCSN, will be moderating that discussion along with our presenters. So we hope that you'll join us for that. You should have received another invitation for that when you signed up for today's webinar. And please sign up for our mailing list so you can find out about future webinars. And so hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you to our presenters, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, you too. Bye.